Kate Mulafalcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Helen. And I could say Happy St. Patrick's Day, but I'm not going to. And I hope you will read my little essay that I wrote about St. Patrick's Day that I put for the public on my Substack. And go on a laptop, go to substack.com, type in Ask Your Irish Granny, and read my article. So in the meantime, I would instead rather honor the goddess Brigid, also known as Brigante or Brigid, eventually morphed into Saint Brigid. But the goddess Brigid was an ancient pagan Irish Celtic goddess. And you need to read my essay. You'll understand. Anyway, it comes from the Proto-Celtic word that means high or exalted. She was the goddess of pre-Christian Ireland. She was associated, and remember this list, she was associated with healing, poetry, inspiration, creative inspiration, smithing, which I thought was really strange. Then I started to read more about it, and it's metalwork. And in ancient Ireland, as in the Norse countries, there's a long tradition of absolutely beautiful metalwork. She's also the goddess of fertility. Her feast day is February 1st, Imbolc. Imbolc is actually the last day of winter, technically. So it's finally, we're getting out of winter, we're beginning spring. She's associated with the element of fire and hot springs. She's connected to the sun and the transformative power of creation. She's also associated with wells and waterways, and I think that has to do with like water coming out of the ground, hot water. She's associated with cows, serpents, and swans. Now the cows, we'll talk about a little in a minute, comes from old pre-Christian pagan mythology, lore, ritual in Ireland. And the serpents, we'll talk about that too. Well, we'll talk about it right now. I just read my notes. So the snake is traditionally in ancient cultures, ancient mystery schools, in pagan beliefs. The snake or the dragon, and just think Adam and Eve and the serpent in the garden, what happens? Can't trust that snake. The snake is a symbol of goddess religions, matriarchal religious belief. And coincidentally, what did St. Patrick supposedly do? He drove the snakes out of Irish. There's a metaphor, out of Ireland. There's a metaphor for you, right? So Imbolc is the feast day, February 1st, the beginning of spring. Today, Brigid, is seen as a symbol of feminine power, creativity, and the natural world. In ancient Irish myth, she's a member of the Tuatha Danann. That is the folk of the goddess Danu. It's like a tribal association, the tribe of the gods. These were a supernatural race. And now if you remember Paul Wallace and all the talk he has done in his books about the origins of the human race being from elsewhere, here's an example. The Tuatha De Danann were the supernatural race of kings and queens, healers, heroes, from whom came the bards. It was an oral tradition, so in song and in language, all knowledge was passed down. And the druids, who were the priest class. These lived in Tir na Nog, the other world, the realm of the gods, a land of everlasting youth, beauty, health, joy, and abundance. It's parallel to or beyond the sea, parallel to the earth or under the earth. No one knows where it is. So you can enter it through caves, burial mounds, go underwater, or travel across the Western Sea. And you might find it by chance. There'll be a magical mist, a mystical, magical mist, and you'll walk into it and find yourself in Tir na Nog. But you should be invited. And this brings to mind the musical Brigadoon. Now that's Scottish, but you know, there are some similar traditions. And that's kind of what happened with Brigadoon, this mysterious village that showed up kind of in a mist. If you stumbled across it or got invited back, Gene Kelly spent some time there. So this is where Brigid was from. She's an otherworldly woman, and she could invite a hero, and she would do that by presenting him with an apple or a silver apple branch, or by leading somebody into Tir na Nog with a ball of thread as it unwound. And this all sort of rings familiar with Roman and Greek mythology. I'm not saying they come from each other. I'm just saying it's interesting, you know, synchronicity. The Tuatha Danann are associated with the fairies, the fairy people. Kind of the fairy idea evolved from them. Their enemies are the destructive powers of nature. For example, the Morrígan. The Morrígan is a female goddess, an entity, the great queen, the phantom queen. We'll talk about her in a minute. No, I'm going to do it right now. I looked it up later to get the details, so it's later in my notes, but I think I can skip. So the Morrígan, as Brigid is the goddess of creation and abundance and creativity and all those healing, those kind of lighter things, the Morrígan is the phantom, the goddess of war and fate. She foretells death and doom or victory in battle. She often appears as a crow, a bav. The crow is like her animal familiar as well. Excuse me. She can incite warriors to battle, or incite them to strike fear in the heart of their enemies, or to do great deeds. She's often depicted washing the blood-stained clothes of those who are fated to die. She's the manifestation of the earth and serenity. She's the guardian of the people, their territory. You may have heard of the banshee. My mother, when we pitched a fit, you know, and we'd cry, she'd sound like a banshee. The banshee is a goddess, an entity that appears, not necessarily that you would see her, but manifests so that you hear her. Usually you hear her wailing, crying, at a distance across the moors, across, you know, it's unpopulated area, and you'd hear this horrifyingly sad crying, and the Irish believed that that was a portent of somebody dying. We had a cat named Banshee. Anyway, interesting little tidbit here. As Brigid is part of a triad, which we'll talk about. So is the Morrígan. And I'll show you, you know, the Trinity, The number 3 is very significant in many pagan belief systems. So the Morrigan is 3 people in one. There's the Bav, the crow, there's Macha, and there's Morrigan or Anna. And these are 3 different names, but for the same goddess. They're actually the 3 sisters of the 3 land goddesses. Eru. Eru is the goddess from whom the name Ireland comes. The Gaelic, the Irish for Ireland is Eire, E-I-R-E, changed to Erin, and then Ireland. The other sister is Banba, and then the third is Foya. The Morrigan is a jealous wife and a shapeshifter. She's associated, as I said, with the Banshee. And her name originally, they think, comes from an Indo-European word called Mor, which means terror. And indirectly, it is where we get the name nightmare. Mor. Morphed into M-A-I-R-E and then nightmare. And she's one of the Tuatha Danann, so we talked about that already. So let's see here. Where did I leave off with Brigid? Here we go. That's the Morrigan, the Phantom Queen. So there are medieval texts, early ancient Irish, but early medieval, late ancient Irish texts, because as I said, it's a oral culture, about this that was written by Christians. Like the Christians came, St. Patrick, and they collected these stories and wrote them after the fact. They're mostly written in what's called Hibernian Latin, which I imagine must be interesting to hear. So it's written by Christians, and they often referred to these gods and goddesses, pseudo-gods and goddesses, the Tuatha Danann, as fallen angels. She's associated, Brigid is associated with the birch tree. She's the goddess whom poets adore. So she had her 2 sisters, but she was the goddess of healing, smith work, and once again, it's a trinity, and which happens to be a Jungian archetype. Carl Jung talks about the archetype of the Trinity in many religions. So Saint Brigid is the medieval woman who was linked to the ancient Celtic goddess Brigid. And Imbolc, the spring feast of Brigid, was sort of morphed into the feast of Saint Brigid, which was the same date, February 1st. So let's talk just a little, since, Saint Brigid of Kildare. She is considered the patroness of Ireland, as Saint Patrick and Columba. So 3 again. She was the abbess of the Abbey of Kildare. Kildare comes from the Irish. It means Church of the Oak. The oak tree was very sacred to the Druids. It all gets sort of pulled in. She began some convents. There's not much known about her. Much of the oral tradition was lost because they killed them all. They went out to destroy the Druid class, who were the receptacles of ancient knowledge. She's mostly conflated with pagan folklore and miracle tales, early Christian miracle tales. She was considered to be, we don't know if she was real or not, St. Brigid. Maybe, maybe not. I believe she was supposed to have been born in 451. Very early Christian church. She was the daughter of a chief and a slave who had been converted, baptized by St. Patrick. She was fostered by a Druid family and became a consecrated virgin. And, you know, this may seem really dense of me, but I've never given it a lot of thought. But nuns are the same things as, let's say, Vestal virgins. That idea of consecrating a young girl and keeping her isolated from the material world. It didn't ever occur to me. I don't know what I was thinking. Let's see here. She's the patron saint of poetry, learning, healing. She, too, like Brigid, is associated with fire and thermal springs. She's also the patron saint of livestock and dairy. And if you remember, I said that Brigid is associated with cows. St. Brigid is the patron saint of dairymen. And I'll explain why here in a second. Kildare, the abbey and then the area, has had a perpetual fire for centuries in her honor. It's just never gone out. She's often called the Mother of the Gale or the Mary of Ireland. There are many supernatural events and customs associated with her. Some people, so scholars disagree. Some scholars believe that the early Christian monks took the ancient figure of the mother goddess, Brigid, and grafted her name and function to a Christian counterpart. Some say she was real, and a chief druid at the temple of the goddess of Brigid who converted it into a Christian monastery. As I said, there are several early Hiberno-Latin and Old Irish prose tales of her life. Born in 451 near either Dundalk or Kildare, nobody knows. So here's where the cows come in. She is ostensibly, her mother was a slave and was out milking the cows and was in labor, and Brigid, and then Brigid, was born at dawn while her mother was crossing the threshold with milk. And this sort of association with dawn, this liminality and being on the lintel, the threshold, this is a vestige of Druidic lore. So there are still some tiny remnants left. But she was born into slavery. Now, not Brigid. Brigid was superhuman. Remember, she was a Tuatha Danann. But they're conflated. And Saint Brigid was born into slavery on the doorstep at dawn. She was freed, and they went on to do farm work. She was known for healing and doing charitable things as a child. I just skipped over those stories. They are convoluted and complicated, and the Irish names are ridiculously difficult to pronounce. Ask my children. She was veiled, which is consecrated as a virgin, and in parentheses I put, a nun. She established, according to lore, the first communal women's religious group in Ireland. Came a bunch of convents, and convent comes from the Latin to come together. She started a school of art and metalwork, and a scriptorium, which was a place where illuminated manuscripts were done. And for example, the Book of Kildare. In the Book of Armagh, she's said to be good friends with St. Patrick, but tiny detail, she was born in 451 and he died in 461. So unless he babysat her, I just don't see it happening. So that's some real, true, indigenous Irish belief for you for the feast of the patriarchy, St. Patrick's Day. Thank you very much for watching, and slán go fóill.